Hi all, welcome to Tapped Into Magic, coming at you here with another deck tech video. I'm one of your hosts, Austin. Today we're going to be talking about my Karn, Scion of Urza Oathbreaker deck. And of course the Oathbreaker is Karn, Scion of Urza. He's a 4-drop legendary planeswalker Karn, and he comes down with 5 loyalty. His +1 is reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them, and you put that card into your hand while you exile the other with a silver counter on it. You can -1 him to put a card with a silver counter on it from exile into your hand, and you can -2 him to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Now, Karn is a good value engine in himself, and that's one of the reasons I have him here, because colorless decks have a little bit of trouble drawing cards, and at the very least, Karn can basically draw you a card every turn. It's either going to be the worst out of the two, or you can -1 him to get the better card there. And then if it comes down to it in a pinch, he can also make creatures. So if you're having trouble drawing into your Eldrazi here, you can always -2 him, get a little creature, and every time you do it, they are going to get bigger and bigger. So he's just an all-around good card to help, or a good Oathbreaker to helm this deck. Now the signature spell I chose is All Is Dust, which is a 7-drop tribal sorcery Eldrazi that says each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. Originally I did have Scour from Existence in the as the signature spell, but I just decided, seeing as All Is Dust is a 7-drop, just like Scour from Existence, but instead of just destroying one permanent or exiling one permanent, I get to get rid of basically the whole board except all of my stuff. So in the end, it just seemed like a more efficient signature spell to put at the helm of the deck. It can clear out the way so we can end the game, which is what I like doing, or having as a signature spell as a way to close out the game, or at least give me an option to. Now, one of the first categories we're going to be getting into here is going to be the value category. These are going to be a couple planeswalkers and a good value creature here that's going to give us value throughout the game and can do multiple things depending on what we need in that moment in time. First one I want to talk about is Ugin the Ineffable. Now, this is a card that is going to that is an option to play as the Oathbreaker in this deck. He does allow us to ramp slightly by making our colorless spells cost 2 less, but it also kind of lets us draw a card, because his +1 lets us exile top card of our library, create a 2/2. When the 2/2 dies, we get that card. So it does take a little bit of work, but it is kind of card draw. And then he allows us to destroy a permanent that's one or more colors, which is really strong. Having something in the command zone with targeted removal is very strong. The other value card here is going to be Ugin the Spirit Dragon, a little more expensive than Ugin the Ineffable, but he's going to come down basically every time you play him. He's going to be a board wipe, a one-sided board wipe that's going to get rid of the board. His +2 doesn't come in that often unless you want to just be giving people incremental damage or damage here and there, taking care of little mana dorks. And then if you get to his -10, I guarantee you're probably going to just be winning that game. And the final card here is going to be Endbringer. He's a 5/5 Eldrazi. He untaps during all players' untap steps, so we can use him over and over and over again. He deals 1 damage to target creature or player, makes it so that one creature can't attack or block, or he can draw us a card. Like I said, drawing cards in colorless decks is very hard, so we want to be able to have as many effects as we can. And if he's untapping every turn, it can potentially let us draw a bunch of cards if he's untapping on anyone else's turn. All right, now we're going to be getting into the card draw category of the deck. And what we have here is we just have a couple of cards, because we do have card draw on our commander, as well as with some of the value engines that we have and give us incremental value there. So the first one we're going to talk about is going to be Kozilek the Great Distortion. Now when you cast him, if you have under 7 cards in your hand, you get to draw up to 7. And then he also has the bonus ability where you can discard a card with a converted mana cost X and counter a spell with converted mana cost X. So Kozilek goes well both in the card draw category and in the control category, which we're going to go through a little bit later. But Kozilek himself, very strong card. He also is a 12/12, so he can go in and smash some face too when we need it to. The other two that we have is Mind's Eye and Oracle's Vault. Mind's Eye allows us to pay 1 and draw a card whenever an opponent draws a card. Oracle's Vault has us exile the top card and we can play it, and then once we have enough brick counters on it, we can actually just cast that card that we exile with it for free. Oracle's Vault, very powerful. I do like that a lot. Anytime you can cheat converted mana costs like that and pay for something for free, it's a very strong effect. All right, the next category we're going to be getting into is going to be Ramp. The first 3 cards I want to talk to you about is all cards that will actually get us lands. Now there is a couple wastes in here and they do count as basic lands, so these cards will all be able to fetch those up. The first one is a Wayfarer's Bauble. It's basically a rampant growth for colorless decks or for decks that don't have green in it. Next one is Solemn Simulacrum, which goes and gets us a land whenever he comes into play, and also when he dies we can draw a card, which are 2 things that this deck desperately needs. And the last one is Burnished Heart, which actually can sacrifice it to get 2 lands, which is very good. The next category here we're going to be getting into is going to be our Mana Rocks. So all of these are cards that come down and tap for mana, more than 1 usually. Now the first one is Everflowing Chalice. I put this one in here because it does get bigger as the game goes on and can tap for more and more mana, the more mana you have to put into it, because of that multi-kicker ability. So it is kind of modal because it's going to get better as the game progresses. And the rest of them are Basalt Monolith, Worn Power Stone, Thran Dynamo, and Gilded Lotus. Those don't really need any explanation there. They all mana rocks that can tap from multiple sources of mana. This deck does have a high mana curve, and there are a lot of big creatures in this deck, so we're going to want to ramp as fast as we can and get a lot of mana onto the board very quickly. The next set of mana rocks that we have here are going to be mana rocks that can also serve another purpose. So we have Thought Vessel, which allows us to have no maximum hand size, and then we also have Mind Stone and Hedron Archive, which are very similar mana rocks that can also allow us to draw cards if we are getting desperate, or maybe we just have enough ramp or we don't really need these anymore and the card draw would be nice. All right, next category we're going to be getting into is going to be our single target removal. This is another thing that colorless decks can kind of struggle with, so most of these are going to be pretty expensive, or they're going to be cards that kind of help out our opponent as well, or don't quite detriment them as much. That's going to be one of the first ones that we talk about here. Is going to be Transmogrifying Wand. It's a new one from M19. Enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters, and you can remove 1 to destroy a creature, and they get a 2/4 White Ox instead. So they are getting a creature, even though you're destroying one of their creatures, but more than likely that 2/4 Ox is not going to be as good as the card we're destroying. And the next one we have here is going to be Duplicant. He comes down and he'll exile a creature for us, and if it's a big creature, he'll also get a lot bigger, so then he can also kind of turn into a beater for us as well. Now the next 3 that we have here are all 7 drops, and they are kind of mainstays in any deck that has trouble removing permanents, or for these colorless decks as well. And they're going to be Meteor Golem, Spine of Ishsaw, and Scour from Existence. All of these do hit non-land permanents at least, and then Spine of Ishsaw and Scour from Existence can hit lands if we really want them to. But just having the option to be able to hit any type of permanent that's kind of causing us problems is something that I really like to do, and I like to keep my removal leaving me with as many options as possible. So that's why I chose these types of removal here in this deck. All right, now the next category we're going to be getting into is going to be board wipes. Now, we do have 3 board wipes here, and then I would also consider Ugin the Spirit Dragon one of our board wipes as well. And then, of course, we also have All Is Dust in the command zone. So there's not a ton of need for a lot of board wipes in this deck, although we are going to have a slow start some games. So we're going to want to be able to clear the board whenever we can to make sure that we're not getting taken out too early. So having a good amount of board wipes in a control deck is something that you're going to want to do. First one I'm going to talk about is going to be Oblivion Stone. So not only can this clear the board, destroy non-land permanents, but it can also allow us to protect maybe a permanent that we're going to need, or maybe save us some ramp because it will be getting rid of mana rocks. So not only will we be able to protect some of our stuff, we're able to keep Oblivion Stone out, but we'll also be wiping the board from opponent stuff too, keeping the theme with the one-sided board wipes that this deck has. The next two board wipes we're going to be talking about are similar in that they are worried about the converted mana cost of the cards that we're getting rid of, and they are Steel Hellkite and Ratchet Bomb. Steel Hellkite, when it hits, we're able to pay mana afterwards and destroy all non-land permanents with that converted mana cost. And Ratchet Bomb, we can put charge counters on it and sacrifice it to destroy all non-land permanents with the same converted mana cost as it has charge counters. Now, these cards are very good against token decks, and also if we notice that an opponent has a decent amount of non-land permanents that have the same converted mana cost, we can kind of just get rid of all those too and get those out of the way. Alright, the next category I'm going to be getting into is going to be our control category. All these cards are going to help us not only control the game, but maybe also slow our opponents down a little bit and allow us to catch up. Because like I said, we do have a good amount of high converted mana cost stuff here, so we don't want to be too behind as far as in our games. First one I'm going to be talking about is Phyrexian Revoker, which is a 2-drop, and it is somewhat of a pithing needle, where when it enters the battlefield, you name a non-land card, and the activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated. So that is very good in this format, because you can choose an opponent's Oathbreaker and basically make it so that the Oathbreaker doesn't do anything, and its activated abilities or loyalty abilities can't be activated. Next one I want to talk about is another one that your opponents will think is no fun and doesn't allow them to play the game. It's Void Winnower, which is a giant 11/9 Eldrazi that doesn't allow spells to be cast from your opponents that have even converted mana cost, and then creatures with even converted mana cost can't block. So this card slows down the game for your opponents, and I would consider it a control card just because it stops so many things. It stops a lot of removal, and just allows us to kind of catch up and have more of a chance to get our other big guys out there. Now, the next two cards I want to talk about are somewhat counter spells. One is Not of This World, and the other one is Warping Whale. Now, Not of This World is a 7-drop tribal instant Eldrazi that allows us to counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control, and it does cast for free if the spell that we're countering is targeting a creature with power 7 or greater, which there are a good amount in this deck. So it's very likely that that's going to happen. And with Warping Whale, this is a modal spell, so it's very good, and I believe it's one of the only ones in colorless, so of course it's an auto include in this deck. And it's going to allow us to exile a utility creature that our opponents have. It can counter target sorcery spell like board wipe or anything like that, or it can just allow us to have a little bit of ramp sitting on the field when we need it with the 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scions. And the last card I am putting in this category here is going to be Shimmermere. Now he has flash, and he also allows our artifact spells to have flash, so we can throw out a surprise Oracle's Vault, or maybe surprise our opponents with a Meteor Golem or Spine of Ishtar when they're least expecting it. Just to kind of destroy things, maybe on the end step before a turn, or put out the Oracle's Vault at the end step before a turn so we can get an extra brick counter on there. Shimmermere is a very good card, and I do consider him somewhat of a control card just because it does allow us to have a little bit more control of the game, because we can get our artifacts out there basically whenever we want. Now, the final category I'm going to go over before we get into the lands is going to be just utility creatures and kind of general creatures, just kind of round out the mana curve of this deck. First one is Eldrazi Mimic. He is a 2-drop and 2/1, so he comes down early, but he does get bigger when we play other creatures with more power and toughness, because he's going to copy their power and toughness when they come into play for that turn. Next one we have is another Eldrazi. It's Reality Smasher. Now this is a 5/5 trampler with haste. That's a little difficult to get rid of, so this one's just a good beater to have out to kind of get in some aggro beats and start hitting our opponents. And the next one is It That Betrays. This is a very powerful Eldrazi because not only does it have Annihilator, which when it attacks it makes people the defending player sacrifice 2 permanents, but it also has that whenever an opponent sacrifices non-token permanent, you put that card under the battlefield under your control. This is very good, and it does go very well with the signature spell All Is Dust, because that card does say each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. So if That Betrays is on the field and we play All Is Dust, we are going to be able to get all of our opponent's non-land permanents and keep them and then use that against them. Next card I want to talk about is going to be Artisan of Kozilek. This card is a good recursion effect that we have here, and it's a 10/9 Eldrazi on top of that, so that's always a good bonus. Now, Artisan of Kozilek, when it comes onto the field, you can return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield. So if for some reason maybe we discarded a larger Eldrazi like Kozilek or If That Betrays, we can play Artisan of Kozilek and not only get this 10/9 with Annihilator, but also get one of our other big beaters back to the field as well. And the last one is Soul of New Phyrexia, which is a 6/6 Trampler, which is good enough for me as it is, but also you can pay 5 and you can make your permanents gain indestructible until end of turn, and it even has one extra one-time effect. When it's in the graveyard, you can activate it again before it exiles and make all your stuff indestructible as well. All right, now the last category, or the last thing that we're going to be talking about in this deck is going to be the lands. There are a good amount of utility lands that I use in this deck, a good amount of lands that kind of help us ramp. Now, the first category of lands I'm going to be talking about is going to be lands that ramp us. The first three I'm going to be talking about is Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Power Plant. Now, all of these lands only tap for 1 on their own, but when you get all 3 onto the battlefield, you can tap them and add 7 to your mana pool. Being that this is a Highlander format and you're only allowed 1 of each in the deck, it's not a likely thing that's going to happen. It's not going to be something that happens consistently, but it is fun. And when you do have the occasional game where you do get all 3 out, or if it's a long game and you're able to get all 3 out, it is a good feeling to have so much mana on the field. And when it only uses 3 lands to tap for 7 mana, you are feeling pretty good about yourself. The next 2 I want to talk about are going to be Scorched Ruins and Temple of the False God. Temple of the False God taps for 2 mana, and you can add that to your mana pool, but you can only have that if you control 5 or more lands. And Scorched Ruins is a very powerful card. When you play it, you do have to sacrifice 2 untapped lands, or you have to sacrifice Scorched Ruins, but if you are able to do that, you can now add 4 colorless mana to your mana pool with Scorched Ruins. So this card allows us to ramp very hard, and if we can get this out turn 3, we're going to be very far ahead just with lands alone. All right, now the next 3 cards that we have here that ramp us are going to be Eye of Ugin, Eldrazi Temple, and Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. All of these care about colorless spells, so that's why they go well in this deck. Eye of Ugin doesn't tap for mana, but it allows our colorless Eldrazi spells to cost 2 less to cast, and we can also pay 7 and tap it to search our library and tutor for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. While Eldrazi Temple and Shrine of the Forsaken Gods will tap for 1 mana or can tap for 2, as long as we are meeting the criteria there. Eldrazi Temple only lets us to add 2 if we're spending it on colorless Eldrazi spells or activating abilities of Eldrazi, and Shrine of the Forsaken Gods allow us to tap it for 2 as long as we're casting colorless spells and as long as we have 7 or more lands. The next category we're going to be going into is going to be our man lands. They're going to be lands that either turn themselves into creatures or can create token creatures for us. These lands are very good for us because this deck doesn't have a ton of creatures, so it is good if we are needing an extra blocker, like a chump blocker, or we're wanting to get in some more aggro beats because maybe we're playing a one-on-one game or anything like that. First 2 I'm going to talk about is going to be Gargoyle Castle and Mishra's Factory. Both of these turn themselves into creatures that we can go ahead and swing into. Just be careful, because if they do die, we are also losing a land drop. So you want to make sure you have plenty of ramp on the board when we do this, or we have some way to protect them. And the next 2 here in the lands that create creatures is going to be Urza's Factory and Foundry of the Councils. Urza's Factory can just pump out 2/2s as long as we have enough mana to do so. And then Foundry of the Council sacrifices itself and gives us 2 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens. So both of these are going to be lands that produce tokens for us. Urza's Factory we are able to do it over and over again, but Foundry of the Councils is only a one-time effect for us. And the next category here is going to be cards that allow us to have some targeted land removal. And in this deck, I'm going to be putting in Tectonic Edge and Ghost Quarter. Both of us allow us to get rid of pesky lands that we maybe don't want our opponents to have, and we can target them and get rid of them. And to wrap up the special lands of the deck, we have just some general utility lands. We're going to have Zhalfirin Void, which comes down and allows us to scry, allowing us to churn through our deck a little faster. Another one is Homeward Path, just in case anyone decides to steal any of our big beaters or maybe any utility things that we have on the board. We're able to get them back with Homeward Path. We also have High Market, which allows us to sacrifice a creature. Let's say if someone's about to steal one of the only Eldrazi's we have on the board, we can sacrifice it to make sure that they don't get it or anything like that. And then we also have Sanctum of Ugin, which whenever we cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, we can sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin and search a library for a colorless creature card. So this one allows us to tutor for maybe a card that can help us win the game, or even just maybe get like a good blocker or some type of effect that we need. This one's good for allowing us to do so. And then finally, in this deck, I run 5 basic wastes, and that's going to round up all the lands in the Karn Scion of Urza deck. But if you are looking to bring the budget down in this deck, you can just fill out all the deck slots with basic wastes, and it is going to allow you to lower the budget of this deck down by a lot, because there are some expensive lands here in this deck. There are a couple more expensive Eldrazi in here, such as Kozilek and It That Betrays. You can always kind of take the Eldrazi theme out of the deck and turn it into more of an artifact creature deck, put in more mirrors and things like Mirror Battlesphere and things like that, and make it more an artifact centric deck. That version of the deck is a little more fragile, because not only are they able to get rid of them because they're artifacts, but also because they're creatures. So it allows your opponents to have a little bit more ways to get rid of your threats. Another thing that you may want to look at taking out if you're looking to get the budget down on this deck is going to be Ugin the Spirit Dragon. It is a pretty expensive planeswalker there, so if you're able to put in another card draw effect, or maybe even the like another board wipe effect in colorless, I would definitely do so in order to bring the budget down on the deck as well. Now, if you do have some questions, go ahead, put that in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can be notified whenever we post new videos here on Tapped Into Magic. And then we will be having podcasts posted, and pretty soon we will be getting some battle videos out for you guys, so you guys can see some Oathbreaker gameplay in some high quality. So as I said, go ahead, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I will be seeing you again shortly.